Charmides. We got back the preceding evening from the camp at Potadea, and since I was arriving after such a long absence, I sought out my accustomed haunts with special pleasure. To be more specific, I went straight to the Palestra of Tereus, the one directly opposite the temple of Basil, and there I found a good number of people, most of whom were familiar, though there were some, too, whom I didn't know. When they saw me coming in unexpectedly, I was immediately hailed at a distance by people coming up from all directions, and Chaerephon, like the wild man he is, sprang up from the midst of a group of people and ran towards me and, seizing me by the hand, exclaimed, "Socrates, how did you come off in the battle?" A short time before we came away, there had been a battle at Potadea, and the people at home had only just got the news. And I said in reply, "Exactly as you see me." "The way we heard it here," he said, "the fighting was very heavy, and many of our friends were killed." "The report is pretty accurate," I said. "Were you actually in the battle?" he said. "Yes, I was there." "Well, come sit down and give us a complete account, because we've had very few details so far." And while he was still talking, he brought me over to Critias, the son of Calescrus, and sat me down there. When I took my seat, I greeted Critias and the rest, and proceeded to relate the news from the camp in answer to whatever questions anyone asked, and they asked plenty of different ones. When they had had enough of these things, I, in my turn, began to question them with respect to affairs at home, about the present state of philosophy, and about the young men, whether there were any who had become distinguished for wisdom or beauty or both. Whereupon Critias, glancing towards the door and seeing several young men coming in and laughing with each other, with a crowd of others following behind, said, "As far as beauty goes, Socrates, I think you will be able to make up your mind straight away, because those coming in are the advanced party, and the admirers of the one who is thought to be the handsomest young man of the day, and I think that he himself cannot be far off." "But who is he?" I said, "and who is his father?" "You probably know him," he said, "but he was not yet grown up when you went away. He is Charmides, the son of my mother's brother Glaucon, and my cousin." "Good heavens, of course I know him," I said, "because he was worth noticing even when he was a child, but now I suppose he must be pretty well grown up." "It won't be long," he said, "before you discover how grown up he is, and how he has turned out." And while he was speaking, Charmides came in. "You mustn't judge by me, my friend. I'm a broken yardstick as far as handsome people are concerned, because practically every one of that age strikes me as beautiful. But even so, at the moment Charmides came in, he seemed to me to be amazing in stature and appearance, and everyone there looked to me to be in love with him. They were so astonished and confused by his entrance, and many other lovers followed in his train. That men of my age should have been affected this way was natural enough, but I noticed that even the small boys fixed their eyes upon him, and no one of them, not even the littlest, looked at anyone else, but all gazed at him as if he were a statue. And Chaerephon called to me and said, 'Well, Socrates, what do you think of the young man? Hasn't he a splendid face?' 'Extraordinary,' I said. 'But if he were willing to strip,' he said, 'you would hardly notice his face, his body is so perfect.' Well, everyone else said the same thing as Chaerephon, and I said, 'By Heracles, you are describing a man without an equal. If he should happen to have one small thing in addition—' 'What's that?' asked Critias. 'If he happens to have a well-formed soul,' I said. 'It would be appropriate if he did, Critias, since he comes from your family.' 'He is very distinguished in that respect too,' he said. 'Then why don't we undress this part of him and have a look at it before we inspect his body? Surely he has already reached the age when he is willing to discuss things.' 'Very much so,' said Critias, 'since he is not only a philosopher, but also, both in his own opinion and that of others, quite a poet.' 'This is a gift, my dear Critias,' I said, 'which has been in your family as far back as Solon. But why not call the young man over and put him through his paces? Even though he is still so young, there can be nothing wrong in talking to him when you are here, since you are both his guardian and his cousin.' 'You are right,' he said. 'We'll call him.' And he immediately spoke to his servant and said, 'Boy, call Charmides, and tell him I want him to meet a doctor for the weakness he told me he was suffering from yesterday. Then Critias said to me, "You see, just lately he's complained of a headache when he gets up in the morning. Why not pretend to him that you know a remedy for it?" "No reason why not," I said, "if he will only come." "Oh, he will come," he said. Which is just what happened. He did come, and his coming caused a lot of laughter, because every one of us who was already seated began pushing hard at his neighbour so as to make a place for him to sit down. The upshot of it was that we made the man sitting at one end get up, and the man at the other end was toppled off sideways. In the end he came and sat down between me and Critias, and then, my friend, I really was in difficulties, and although I had thought it would be perfectly easy to talk to him, I found my previous brash confidence quite gone. And when Critias said that I was the person who knew the remedy, and he turned his full gaze upon me in a manner beyond description, and seemed on the point of asking a question, and when everyone in the palestra surged all round us in a circle, my noble friend, I saw inside his cloak, and caught on fire, and was quite beside myself. And it occurred to me that Sidious was the wisest love poet when he gave someone advice on the subject of beautiful boys, and said that the fawn should beware lest, while taking a look at the lion, he should provide part of the lion's dinner, because I felt as if I had been snapped up by such a creature. All the same, when he asked me if I knew the headache remedy, I managed somehow to answer that I did. "What exactly is it?" he said. And I said that it was a certain leaf, and that there was a charm to go with it. If one sang the charm while applying the leaf, the remedy would bring about a complete cure, but without the charm, the leaf was useless. And he said, "Well then, shall I write down the charm at your dictation?" "With my permission," I said, "or without it?" "With it, of course, Socrates," he said, laughing. "Very well," I said, "and are you quite sure about my name?" "It would be disgraceful if I were not," he said, "because you are no small topic of conversation among us boys, and besides, I remember you being with Critias here when I was a child." "Good for you," I said. "Then I shall speak more freely about the nature of the charm. Just now I was in difficulties about what method I would adopt in order to demonstrate its power to you. Its nature, Charmides, is not such as to be able to cure the head alone. You have probably heard this about good doctors, that if you go to them with a pain in the eyes, they are likely to say that they cannot undertake to cure the eyes by themselves, but that it will be necessary to treat the head at the same time, if things are also to go well with the eyes. And again, it would be very foolish to suppose that one could ever treat the head by itself without treating the whole body. In keeping with this principle, they plan a regime for the whole body with the idea of treating and curing the part along with the whole. Or haven't you noticed that this is what they say, and what the situation is?" "Yes, I have," he said. "Then what I have said appears true, and you accept the principle?" "Absolutely," he said. And when I heard his approval, I took heart, and, little by little, my former confidence revived, and I began to wake up. So I said, "Well, Charmides, it is just the same with this charm. I learned it while I was with the army, from one of the Thracian doctors of Zalmoxis, who are also said to make men immortal. And this Thracian said that the Greek doctors were right to say what I told you just now. But our king Zalmoxis, he said, who is a god, says that just as one should not attempt to cure the eyes apart from the head, nor the head apart from the body, so one should not attempt to cure the body apart from the soul. And this, he says, is the very reason why most diseases are beyond the Greek doctors, that they do not pay attention to the whole as they ought to do, since if the whole is not in good condition, it is impossible that the part should be. Because, he said, the soul is the source both of bodily health and bodily disease for the whole man, and these flow from the soul in the same way that the eyes are affected by the head. So it is necessary first and foremost to cure the soul if the parts of the head and of the rest of the body are to be healthy. And the soul, he said, my dear friend, is cured by means of certain charms, and these charms consist of beautiful words. It is a result of such words that temperance arises in the soul, and when the soul acquires and possesses temperance, it is easy to provide health both for the head and for the rest of the body. So when he taught me the remedy and the charms, he also said, "Don't let anyone persuade you to treat his head with this remedy, who does not first submit his soul to you for treatment with the charm. Because nowadays, he said, this is the mistake some doctors make with their patients. They try to produce health of body apart from health of soul. And he gave me very strict instructions that I should be deaf to the entreaties of wealth, position, and personal beauty. So I, for I have given him my promise and must keep it, shall be obedient, and if you are willing, in accordance with the stranger's instructions, to submit your soul to be charmed with the Thracian's charms first, then I shall apply the remedy to your head, but if not, there is nothing we can do for you, my dear Charmides. When Critias heard me saying this, he said, the headache will turn out to have been a lucky thing for the young man Socrates if, because of his head, he will be forced to improve his wits. Let me tell you, though, that Charmides not only outstrips his contemporaries in beauty of form, but also in this very thing for which you say you have the charm. It was temperance, wasn't it? Yes, indeed it was, I said. Then you must know that not only does he have the reputation of being the most temperate young man of the day, but that he is second to none in everything else appropriate to his age. And it is quite right, Charmides, that you should be superior to the rest in all such things, I replied, because I don't suppose that anyone else here could so readily point to two Athenian families whose union would be likely to produce a more aristocratic lineage than that from which you are sprung. Your father's family, that of Critias, the son of Dropides, has been praised for us by Anacreon, Solon, and many other poets for superior beauty, virtue, and everything else called happiness. It's the same on your mother's side. Your maternal uncle, Pyrilampes, has the reputation of being the finest and most influential man in the country because of his numerous embassies to the great king and others, so that this whole side of the family is not a bit inferior to the other. As the offspring of such forebears, it is likely that you hold pride of place. In the matter of visible beauty, dear son of Glaucon, you appear to me to be in no respect surpassed by those who come before. But if, in addition, you have a sufficient share of temperance and the other attributes mentioned by your friend here, then your mother bore a blessed son in you, my dear Charmides. Now, this is the situation. If temperance is already present in you, as Critias here asserts, and if you are sufficiently temperate, you have no need of the charms either of Zalmoxis or of Abaris the Hyperborean, and you may have the remedy for the head straight away. But if you still appear to lack these things, you must be charmed before you are given the remedy. So, tell me yourself, do you agree with your friend and assert that you already partake sufficiently of temperance, or would you say that you are lacking in it? At first Charmides blushed and looked more beautiful than ever, and his bashfulness was becoming at his age. Then he answered in a way that was quite dignified. He said that it was not easy for him in the present circumstances either to agree or to disagree with what had been asked. Because, he said, if I should deny that I am temperate, it would not only seem an odd thing to say about oneself, but I would at the same time make Critias here a liar, and so with the many others to whom, by his account, I appear to be temperate. But if, on the other hand, I should agree and should praise myself, perhaps that would appear distasteful, so I do not know what I am to answer. And I said, what you say appears to me to be reasonable, Charmides, and I think, I said, we ought to investigate together the question whether you do or do not possess the thing I am inquiring about, so that you will not be forced to say anything against your will, and I, on the other hand, shall not turn to doctoring in an irresponsible way. If this is agreeable to you, I would like to investigate the question with you, but if not, we can give it up. Oh, I should like it above all things, he said, so go ahead and investigate the matter in whatever way you think best. Well then, I said, in these circumstances, I think the following method would be best. Now it is clear that if temperance is present in you, you have some opinion about it, because it is necessary, I suppose, that if it really resides in you, it provides a sense of its presence, by means of which you would form an opinion, not only that you have it, but of what sort it is. Or don't you think so? Yes, he said, I do think so. Well then, since you know how to speak Greek, I said, I suppose you could express this impression of yours in just the way it strikes you. Perhaps, he said. Well, to help us decide whether it resides in you or not, say what, in your opinion, temperance is, I said. At first he shied away and was rather unwilling to answer, Finally, however, he said that in his opinion, temperance was doing everything in an orderly and quiet way. Things like walking in the streets and talking, and doing everything else in a similar fashion. So I think, he said, taking it all together, that what you ask about is a sort of quietness. Perhaps you are right, I said. At least they do say, Charmides, that the quiet are temperate. Let's see if there is anything in it. Tell me, temperance is one of the admirable things, isn't it? Yes, indeed, he said. Now, when you are the writing masters, is it more admirable to copy the letters quickly or quietly? Quickly. What about reading? Quickly or quietly? Quickly. And certainly to play the lyre quickly and to wrestle in a lively fashion is much more admirable than to do these things quietly and slowly. Yes. Well, isn't the same thing true about boxing and the pancration? Yes, indeed. And with running and jumping and all the movements of the body, aren't the ones that are performed briskly and quickly the admirable ones, and those performed with difficulty and quietly the ugly ones? It seems so. And it seems to us that, in matters of the body, it is not the quieter movement, but the quickest and most lively, which is the most admirable. Isn't it so? Yes, indeed. But temperance was something admirable. Yes. Then in the case of the body, it would not be quietness, but quickness, which is the more temperate, since temperance is an admirable thing. That seems reasonable, he said. Well then, I said, is facility in learning more admirable, or difficulty in learning? Facility. But facility in learning is learning quickly, and difficulty in learning is learning quietly and slowly. Yes. And to teach another person quickly, isn't this far more admirable than to teach him quietly and slowly? Yes. Well then, to recall and remember quietly and slowly, is this more admirable, or to do it vehemently and quickly? Vehemently, he said, and quickly. And isn't shrewdness a kind of liveliness of soul, and not a kind of quietness? True. And again, this is also true of understanding what is said. At the writing masters, and at the liars' teachers, and everywhere else, to act not as quietly, but as quickly as possible, is the most admirable. Yes. And further, in the operations of thought and in making plans, it is not the quietest man, I think, and the man who plans and finds out things with difficulty who appears to be worthy of praise, but the one who does these things most easily and quickly. Exactly so, he said. Therefore, Charmides, I said, in all these cases, both of soul and body, we think that quickness and speed are more admirable than slowness and quietness. It seems likely, he said. We conclude then that temperance would not be a kind of quietness, nor would the temperate life be quiet, as far as this argument is concerned at any rate, since the temperate life is necessarily an admirable thing. There are two possibilities for us. Either no quiet actions in life appear to be more admirable than the swift and strong ones, or very few. If then, my friend, even quite a few quiet actions should turn out to be more admirable than the violent and quick ones, not even on this assumption would temperance consist in doing things quietly, rather than in doing them violently and quickly, neither in walking nor in speech, nor in anything else, nor would the quiet life be more temperate than its opposite, since in the course of the argument we place temperance among the admirable things, and the quick things have turned out to be no less admirable than the quiet ones. What you say seems to me quite right, Socrates, he said. Then start over again, Charmides, I said, and look into yourself with greater concentration, and when you have decided what effect the presence of temperance has upon you, and what sort of thing it must be to have this effect, then put all this together and tell me clearly and bravely what does it appear to you to be. He paused and, looking into himself very manfully, said, Well, temperance seems to me to make people ashamed and bashful, and so I think modesty must be what temperance really is. But, I said, didn't we agree just now that temperance was an admirable thing? Yes, we did, he said. And it would follow that temperate men are good. Yes. And could a thing be good that does not produce good men? Of course not. Then not only is temperance an admirable thing, but it is a good thing. I agree. Well then, I said, you don't agree with Homer when he said that modesty is not a good mate for a needy man? Oh, but I do, he said. So it seems to be the case that modesty both is and is not a good. Yes, it does. But temperance must be a good if it makes those good in whom it is present and makes bad those in whom it is not. Why, yes, it seems to me to be exactly as you say. Then temperance would not be modesty if it really is a good, and if modesty is no more good than bad. What you say has quite convinced me, Socrates, he said, but give me your opinion of the following definition of temperance. I have just remembered having heard someone say that temperance is minding one's own business. Tell me if you think the person who said this was right. And I said, you wretch, you've picked this up from Critias or from some other wise man. I guess it was from some other, said Critias, because it was certainly not from me. What difference does it make, Socrates? Said Charmides, from whom I heard it. None at all, I answered, since the question at issue is not who said it, but whether what he said is true or not. Now I like what you say, he said. Good for you, I replied, but if we succeed in finding out what it means, I should be surprised, because it seems to be a sort of riddle. In what way? He asked. I mean, I said, that when he uttered the words, I don't suppose the person speaking really meant that temperance was minding your own business, or do you consider that the writing master does nothing when he writes or reads? On the contrary, I do think he does something. And do you think the writing master teaches you to read and write your own name only, or those of the other boys as well? And do you write the names of your enemies just as much as your own names, and those of your friends? Just as much, he said. And are you a busybody and intemperate when you do this? Not at all. But aren't you doing other people's business if to read and write are to do something? I suppose I am. And then healing, my friend, is doing something, I suppose, and so is house building and weaving and engaging in any one of the arts. Yes, indeed. Well then, I said, do you think a city would be well governed by a law commanding each man to weave and wash his own cloak, make his own shoes and oil flask and scraper, and perform everything else by this same principle of keeping his hands off other people's things and making and doing his own? No, I don't think it would, he said. But, said I, if a city is going to be temperately governed, it must be governed well. Of course, he said. Then, if temperance is minding your own business, it can't be minding things of this sort and in this fashion. Apparently not. Then the person who said that temperance was minding your own business must apparently have been riddling, as I pointed out just now, because I don't suppose he was quite so simple-minded. Or was it some silly fellow you heard saying this, Charmides? Far from it, he said. He seems very wise indeed. Then I think he must certainly have tossed off a riddle, since it is difficult to know what in the world this minding your own business can be. Perhaps it is, he said. Then what in the world is minding your own business, are you able to say? I'm at a total loss, he said, but perhaps the one who said it didn't know what he meant either, and when he said this he smiled and looked at Critias. It was clear that Critias had been agitated for some time, and also that he was eager to impress Charmides and the rest who were there. He had held himself in with difficulty earlier, but now he could do so no longer. In my opinion, what I suspected earlier was certainly true, that Charmides had picked up this saying about temperance from Critias. And then Charmides, who wanted the author of the definition to take over the argument rather than himself, tried to provoke him to it by going on pointing out that the cause was lost. Critias couldn't put up with this, but seemed to me to be angry with Charmides just the way a poet is when his verse is mangled by the actors. So he gave him a look and said, Do you suppose, Charmides, that just because you don't understand what in the world the man meant who said that temperance was minding your own business, the man himself doesn't understand either? Well, my dear Critias, said I, there would be nothing remarkable in being ignorant of the matter at his age, but you, because of your age and experience, are very likely to understand it. So, if you agree that temperance is what the man said it was, and take over the argument, I would be very happy to investigate with you the question whether what was said is true or not. I am quite ready to agree, he said, and to take over the argument. I admire you for it, I said. Now tell me, do you also agree with what I was just saying, that all craftsmen make something? Yes, I do. And do they seem to you to make their own things only, or those of other people as well? Those of others as well. And are they temperate in not making their own things only? Is there any objection, he asked. None for me, I said, but see whether there may not be one for the man who defines temperance as minding your own business, and then says there is no objection if those who do other people's business are temperate too. But, said he, have I agreed that those who do other people's business are temperate by admitting that those making other people's things are temperate? Tell me, I said, don't you call making and doing the same thing? Not at all, he said, nor do I call working and making the same. I have learned this from Hesiod, who said, work is no disgrace. Do you suppose that Hesiod, if he referred to the sort of thing you mentioned just now by both the term work and the term do, would have said there was no disgrace in cobbling or selling salt fish or prostitution? One ought not to think this, Socrates, but rather believe, as I do, that he supposed making to be something other than doing and working, and that a made or created thing became a disgrace on those occasions when it was not accompanied by the admirable, but that work is never any sort of disgrace. Because he gave the name works to things done admirably and usefully, and its creations of this sort which are works and actions, we ought to represent him as thinking that only things of this sort are one's own, and that all the harmful ones belong to other people. The result is that we must suppose that Hesiod, and any other man of sense, calls the man who minds his own business temperate. Critias, I said, I understood the beginning of your speech pretty well when you said that you called things that were one's own and of oneself good, and called the doing of good things actions, because I have heard Prodicus discourse upon the distinction in words 100 times. Well, I give you permission to define each word the way you like, just so long as you make clear the application of whatever word you use. Now, start at the beginning and define more clearly. The doing of good things, or the making of them, or whatever you want to call it, is this what you say temperance is? Yes, it is, he said. And the man who performs evil actions is not temperate, but the man who performs good ones. Doesn't it seem so to you, my friend? Never mind that, I said. We are not investigating what I think, but rather what you now say. Well, then I, he said, deny that the man who does things that are not good but bad is temperate, and assert that the man who does things that are good but not bad is temperate. So I give you a clear definition of temperance as the doing of good things. And there is no reason why you should not be speaking the truth. But it certainly does surprise me, I said, if you believe that temperate men are ignorant of their temperance. I don't think so at all, he said. But didn't you just say a moment ago, said I, that there was nothing to prevent craftsmen, even while they do other people's business, from being temperate? Yes, I did say that, he said. What about it? Nothing. But tell me if you think that a doctor, when he makes someone healthy, does something useful for both himself and for the person he cures. Yes, I agree. And the man who does these things does what he ought? Yes. And the man who does what he ought is temperate, isn't he? Of course he is temperate. And does a doctor have to know when he cures in a useful way, and when he does not? And so with each of the craftsmen? Does he have to know when he is going to benefit from the work he performs, and when he is not? Perhaps not. Then, sometimes, I said, the doctor doesn't know himself whether he has acted beneficially or harmfully. Now, if he has acted beneficially, then, according to your argument, he has acted temperately. Or isn't this what you said? Yes, it is. Then it seems that on some occasions he acts beneficially, and, in doing so, acts temperately and is temperate, but is ignorant of his own temperance. But this, he said, Socrates, would never happen, and if you think it necessary to draw this conclusion from what I admitted before, then I would rather withdraw some of my statements, and would not be ashamed to admit I had made a mistake, in preference to conceding that a man ignorant of himself could be temperate. As a matter of fact, this is pretty much what I say temperance is, to know oneself, and I agree with the inscription to this effect set up at Delphi. because this inscription appears to me to have been dedicated for the following purpose, as though it were a greeting from the god to those coming in place of the usual hail, as though to say hail were an incorrect greeting, but we should rather urge one another to be temperate. It is in this fashion, then, that the god greets those who enter his temple, not after the manner of man, or so I suppose the man thought who dedicated the inscription. What he says to the person entering is nothing else than, "Be temperate." This is what he says. Now, in saying this, he speaks very darkly, as a seer would do, that "know thyself and be temperate" are the same, as the inscription claims, and so do I, might be doubted by some, and this I think to be the case with those who dedicated the later inscriptions, "Nothing too much" and "Pledges lead to perdition." Because these people thought that "know thyself" was a piece of advice, and not the god's greeting to those who enter, so, with the idea of dedicating some admonitions, which were no less useful, they wrote these things and put them up. But here's the reason why I say all this, Socrates. I concede to you everything that was said before. Perhaps you said something more nearly right on the subject, and perhaps I did, but nothing of what we said was really clear. But now I wish to give you an explanation of this definition, unless of course you already agree that temperance is to know oneself. "But Critias," I replied, "you are talking to me as though I professed to know the answers to my own questions, and as though I could agree with you if I really wished. This is not the case. Rather, because of my own ignorance, I am continually investigating in your company whatever is put forward. However, if I think it over, I am willing to say whether I agree or not. Just wait while I consider." "Well, think it over," he said. "Yes, I'm thinking," said I. "Well, if knowing is what temperance is, then it clearly must be some sort of science, and must be of something. Isn't that so?" "Yes, of oneself," he said. "Then medicine too," I said, "is a science and is of health?" "Certainly." "Now," I said, "if you should ask me, if medicine is a science of health, what benefits does it confer upon us, and what does it produce? I would answer that it conferred no small benefit, because health is a fine result for us, if you agree that this is what it produces." "I agree." "And if you should ask me something about house building, which is a science of building houses, and ask what I say that it produces, I would say that it produces houses, and so on with the other arts. So, you ought to give an answer on behalf of temperance, since you say it is a science of self, in case you should be asked, 'Critias, since temperance is a science of self, what fine result does it produce which is worthy of the name? Come along, tell me.'" "But Socrates," he said, "you are not conducting the investigation in the right way. This science does not have the same nature as the rest, any more than they have the same nature as each other. But you are carrying on the investigation as though they were all the same. For instance," he said, "in the arts of calculation and geometry, tell me what is the product corresponding to the house in the case of house building, and the cloak in the case of weaving, and so on. One could give many instances from many arts. You ought to point out to me a similar product in these cases, but you won't be able to do it." And I said, "You are right, but I can point out to you in the case of each one of these sciences what it is a science of, this being distinct from the science itself. For instance, the art of calculation, of course, is of the odd and even. How many they are in themselves and with respect to other numbers, isn't that so?" "Yes, indeed," he said. "Now, aren't the odd and even distinct from the art of calculation itself?" "Of course. And again, the art of weighing is an art concerned with the heavier and lighter, and the heavy and light are distinct from the art of weighing. Do you agree?" "Yes, I do." "Then, since temperance is also a science of something, state what that something is, which is distinct from temperance itself." "This is just what I mean, Socrates," he said. "You arrive at the point of investigating the respect in which temperance differs from all the other sciences, and then you start looking for some way in which it resembles all the others. It's not like this, but rather, all the others are sciences of something else, not of themselves, whereas this is the only science which is both of other sciences and of itself. And I think you are quite consciously doing what you denied doing a moment ago. You are trying to refute me and ignoring the real question at issue." Oh, calm, I said. How could you possibly think that even if I were to refute everything you say, I would be doing it for any other reasons than the one I would give for a thorough investigation of my own statements, the fear of unconsciously thinking I know something when I do not? And this is what I claim to be doing now, examining the arguments for my own sake primarily, but perhaps also for the sake of my friends. Or don't you believe it to be for the common good, or for that of most men, that the state of each existing thing should become clear? Very much so, Socrates, he said. Pluck up courage then, my friend, and answer the question as seems best to you, paying no attention to whether it is Critias or Socrates who is being refuted. Instead, give your attention to the argument itself, to see what the result of its refutation will be. All right, I will do as you say, because you seem to me to be talking sense. Then remind me, I asked, what is it you say about temperance? I say, he replied, that it is the only science that is both a science of itself and of the other sciences. Would it then, I said, also be a science of the absence of science, if it is a science of science? Of course, he said. Then only the temperate man will know himself and will be able to examine what he knows and does not know, and in the same way he will be able to inspect other people to see when a man does in fact know what he knows and thinks he knows, and when again he does not know what he thinks he knows, and no one else will be able to do this. And being temperate and temperance and knowing oneself amount to this, to knowing what one knows and does not know. Or isn't this what you say? Yes, it is, he said. Then for our third libation, the lucky one, let us investigate as though from the beginning 2 points. First, whether it is possible or not to know that one knows and does not know what he knows and does not know, and second, should this be perfectly possible, what benefit there would be for those who know this. Yes, we ought to look into this, he said. Then come on, Critias, said I, and consider whether you appear better off than I in these matters, because I am in difficulties. Shall I tell you where my difficulty lies? Yes, do. Well, I said, wouldn't the whole thing amount to this? If what you said just now is true, that there is one science which is not of anything except itself, and the other science is, and that this same science is also a science of the absence of science. Yes, indeed. Then, see what an odd thing we are attempting to say, my friend, because if you look for this same thing in other cases, you will find, I think, that it is impossible. How is that? And what cases do you mean? Cases like the following. Consider, for instance, if you think there could be a kind of vision that is not the vision of the thing that other visions are of, but is the vision of itself and the other visions, and also of the lack of visions, and, although it is a type of vision, it sees no colour, only itself and the other visions. Do you think there is something of this kind? Good heavens, no, not I. And what about a kind of hearing that hears no sound, but hears itself, and the other hearings and non-hearings? Not this either. Then take all the senses together, and see if there is any one of them that is a sense of the senses, and of itself, but that senses nothing which the other senses sense. I can't see that there is. And do you think there is any desire that is a desire for no pleasure, but for itself and the other desires? Certainly not. Nor indeed any wish, I think, that wishes for no good but only for itself, and the other wishes. No, that would follow. And would you say there was a love of such a sort as to be a love of no fine thing, but of itself and of the other loves? No, he said, I would not. And have you ever observed a fear that fears itself and the other fears, but of frightful things fears not a one? I have never observed such a thing, he said. Or an opinion that is of itself and other opinions, but opines nothing that other opinions do? Never. But we are saying, it seems, that there is a science of this sort, which is a science of no branch of learning, but is a science of itself and the other sciences. Yes, we are saying that. But isn't it strange if there really is such a thing? However, we ought not yet to state categorically that there is not, but still go on investigating whether there is. You are right. Come on then. Is this science a science of something, and does it have a certain faculty of being of something? What about it? Yes, it does. And do we say the greater has a certain faculty of being greater than something? Yes, it has. Presumably then something less, if it is going to be greater, necessarily. Then if we should discover something greater that is greater than the greater things, and than itself, but greater than nothing than which the other greater things are greater, surely what would happen to it is that, if it were actually greater than itself, it would also be less than itself, wouldn't it? That would certainly have to be the case, Socrates, he said. It would follow, too, that anything that was the double of the other doubles and of itself would, I suppose, be half of itself and of the other doubles, because I don't suppose there is a double of anything else except a half. That's true. And something that is more than itself will also be less, and the heavier, lighter, and the older, younger. And so with all the other cases. The very thing which has its own faculty applied to itself will have to have that nature towards which the faculty was directed, won't it? I mean something like this. In the case of hearing, don't we say that hearing is of nothing else than sound? Yes. Then if it actually hears itself, it will hear itself possessing sound, because otherwise it would not do any hearing. Necessarily so. And vision, I take it, O best of men, if it actually sees itself, will have to have some colour, because vision could certainly never see anything that has no colour. No, that would follow. You observe, then, Critias, that of these cases we have gone through, some appear to us to be absolutely impossible, whereas in others it is very doubtful if they could ever apply their own faculties to themselves. And that magnitude and number and similar things belongs to the absolutely impossible group. Isn't that so? Certainly. Again, that hearing or vision or, in fact, any sort of motion should move itself or heat burn itself, all cases like this also produce disbelief in some, though perhaps there are some in whom it does not. What we need, my friend, is some great man to give an adequate interpretation of this point in every detail, whether no existing thing can by nature apply its own faculty to itself, but only towards something else, or whether some can, but others cannot. We also need him to determine whether, if there are things that apply to themselves, the science which we call temperance is among them. I do not regard myself as competent to deal with these matters, and this is why I am neither able to state categorically whether there might possibly be a science of science, nor, if it definitely were possible, able to accept temperance as such a science before I investigate whether such a thing would benefit us or not. Now I divine that temperance is something beneficial and good. Do you then, O son of Callaeschrus, since the definition of temperance as the science of science and, more especially, of the absence of science belongs to you, first clear up this point, that what I just mentioned is possible, and then, after having shown its possibility, go on to show that it is useful. And so, perhaps you will satisfy me that you are right about what temperance is. When Critias heard this and saw that I was in difficulties, then, just as in the case of people who start yawning when they see other people doing it, he seemed to be affected by my troubles and to be seized by difficulties himself. But since his consistently high reputation made him feel ashamed in the eyes of the company, and he did not wish to admit to me that he was incapable of dealing with the question I had asked him, he said nothing clear but concealed his predicament. So I, in order that our argument should go forward, said, "But if it seems right, Critias, let us now grant this point, that the existence of a science of science is possible. We can investigate on some other occasion whether this is really the case or not. Come then, if this is perfectly possible, is it any more possible to know what one knows and does not know? We did say, I think, that knowing oneself and being temperate consisted in this." "Yes, indeed," he said, "and your conclusion seems to me to follow, Socrates, because if a man has a science which knows itself, he would be the very same sort of man as the science which he has. For instance, whenever a person has speed, he is swift, and when he has beauty, he is beautiful, and when he has knowledge, he is knowing. So when a person has a knowledge which knows itself, then I imagine he will be a person who knows himself. It is not this point, I said, on which I am confused, that whenever someone possesses this thing which knows itself, he will know himself, but how the person possessing it will necessarily know what he knows and what he does not know. But this is the same thing as the other, Socrates. Perhaps, I said, but I'm in danger of being as confused as ever, because I still don't understand how knowing what one knows and does not know is the same thing as knowledge of self. How do you mean? He said. It's like this, I said. Supposing that there is a science of science, will it be anything more than the ability to divide things and say that one is science and the other not? No, it amounts to this. And is it the same thing as the science and absence of health, and as the science and absence of justice? Not at all. One is medicine, I think, and the other politics, but we are concerned with science pure and simple. What else? Therefore, when a person lacks this additional science of health and justice, but knows science only, seeing that this is the only knowledge he has, then he will be likely, both in his own case and in that of others, to know that he knows something and has a certain science, won't he? Yes. And how will he know whatever he knows by means of this science? Because he will know the healthy by medicine, but not by temperance, and the harmonious by music, but not by temperance, and house-building by that art, but not by temperance, and so on. Isn't it so? It seems so. But by temperance, if it is merely a science of science, how will a person know that he knows the healthy, or that he knows house-building? He won't at all. Then the man ignorant of this won't know what he knows, but only that he knows. Very likely. Then this would not be being temperate, and would not be temperance, to know what one knows and does not know, but only that one knows and does not know, or so it seems. Probably. Nor when another person claims to know something, will our friend be able to find out whether he knows what he says he knows or does not know it. But he will only know this much, it seems, that the man has some science, yes, but of what, temperance will fail to inform him. Apparently so. So neither will he be able to distinguish the man who pretends to be a doctor, but is not, from the man who really is one, nor will he be able to make this distinction for any of the other experts. And let's see what follows. If the temperate man, or anyone else whatsoever, is going to tell the real doctor from the false, how will he go about it? He won't, I suppose, engage him in conversation on the subject of medicine, because what the doctor knows, we say, is nothing but health and disease. Isn't that so? Yes, that is the case. But about science the doctor knows nothing, because we have allotted precisely this function to temperance alone. Yes. Neither will the doctor know anything about medicine, since medicine is a science. True. However, the temperate man will know that the doctor has some science, but in order to try and grasp what sort it is, won't he have to examine what it is of? Because hasn't each science been defined not just as science, but also by that which it is of? By that, certainly. Now, medicine is distinguished from the other sciences by virtue of its definition as science of health and disease. Yes. It follows that the man who wants to examine medicine should look for it where it is to be found, because I don't suppose he will discover it where it is not to be found, do you? Certainly not. Then the man who conducts the examination correctly will examine the doctor in those matters in which he is a medical man, namely health and disease. So it seems. And he will look into the matter of his words and actions to see if what he says is truly spoken and what he does is correctly done. Necessarily. But without the medical art, would anyone be able to follow up either of these things? Certainly not. No one, in fact, could do this, it seems, except the doctor, not even the temperate man himself. If he could, he would be a doctor in addition to his temperance. That is the case. The upshot of the matter is, then, that if temperance is only the science of science and absence of science, it will not be able to distinguish the doctor who knows the particulars of his art from the one who does not know them, but pretends or supposes he does, nor will it recognize any other genuine practitioner whatsoever, except the man in its own field, the way other craftsmen do. It seems so, he said. Then, Critias, I replied, what benefit would we get from temperance if it is of this nature? Because if, as we assumed in the beginning, the temperate man knew what he knew and what he did not know, and that he knows the former but not the latter, and were able to investigate another man who was in the same situation, then it would be of the greatest benefit to us to be temperate, because those of us who had temperance would live lives free from error, and so would all those who were under our rule. Neither would we ourselves be attempting to do things we did not understand. Rather, we would find those who did understand and turn the matter over to them. Nor would we trust those over whom we ruled to do anything except what they would do correctly, and this would be that of which they possessed the signs. And thus, by means of temperance, every household would be well run, and every city well governed, and so in every case where temperance reigned. And with error rooted out and rightness in control, men so circumstanced would necessarily fare admirably and well in all their doings, and, faring well, they would be happy. Isn't this what we mean about temperance, Critias? I said, when we say what a good thing it would be to know what one knows and what one does not know? This is certainly what we mean, he said. But now you see, I replied, that no science of this sort has put in an appearance. I see that, he said. Well then, I said, is this the advantage of the knowledge of science and absence of science, which we are now finding out to be temperance, that the man who has this science will learn whatever he learns more easily, and everything will appear to him in a clearer light, since, in addition to what he learns, he will perceive the science? And he will examine others on the subjects he himself knows in a more effective fashion, whereas those without the science will conduct their examinations in a weaker and less fruitful way. And are not these, my friend, the kind of benefits we shall reap from temperance? Or are we regarding it as something greater, and demanding that it be greater than it really is? Perhaps that may be so, he said. Perhaps, I said. And perhaps we have been demanding something useless. I say this because certain odd things become clear about temperance if it has this nature. If you are willing, let us investigate the matter by admitting both that it is possible to know a science and also, what we assumed temperance to be in the beginning, to know what one knows and does not know. Let us grant this and not deny it. And, having granted all these things, let us investigate more thoroughly whether, if it is like this, it will benefit us in any way. Because what we were saying just now about temperance being regarded as of great benefit, if it were like this, in the governing of households and cities, does not seem to me, Critias, to have been well said. In what way? He asked. Because, I said, we carelessly agreed that it would be a great good for men if each of us should perform the things he knows and should hand over what he does not know to those others who do. And weren't we right in agreeing on this, he said. I don't think we were, I replied. You certainly say some queer things, Socrates, he said. By the dog, I said, they seem queer to me too, and that is why, when I became aware of this a moment ago, I said that some strange things would come to light, and that I was afraid we were not conducting the examination correctly. Because truly, even if there were no doubt that temperance is like this, it appears in no way clear to me that it does us any good. How so? He said. Tell me, so that we can both understand what you are saying. I think I am making a fool of myself, I said, but all the same, it is necessary to investigate what occurs to us and not to proceed at random if we are going to have the least care for ourselves. You are right, he said. Listen then, I said, to my dream to see whether it comes through horn or through ivory. If temperance really ruled over us and were, as we now define it, surely everything would be done according to science. Neither would anyone who says he is a pilot but is not deceive us, nor would any doctor or general or anyone else pretending to know what he does not know escape our notice. This being the situation, wouldn't we have greater bodily health than we do now, and safety when we are in danger at sea or in battle? And wouldn't we have dishes and all our clothes and shoes and things skilfully made for us, and many other things as well, because we would be employing true craftsmen? And, if you will, let us even agree that the mantic art is knowledge of what is to be, and that of temperance, direct in her, keeps away deceivers and sets up the true seers as prophets of the future. I grant that the human race, if thus equipped, would act and live in a scientific way, because temperance, watching over it, would not allow the absence of science to creep in and become our accomplice. But whether acting scientifically would make us fare well and be happy, this we have yet to learn, my dear Critias. But on the other hand, he said, you will not readily gain the prize of faring well by any other means, if you eliminate scientific action. Instruct me on just one more small point, I said. When you say that something is scientifically done, are you talking about the science of cutting out shoes? Good heavens, no. Of bronze working, then? Certainly not. Then of wool or wood or some similar thing? Of course not. Then, I said, we no longer keep to the statement that the man who lives scientifically is happy, because those who live in the ways we mentioned are not admitted by you to be happy, but rather you seem to me to define the happy man as one who lives scientifically concerning certain specific things. And perhaps you mean the person I mentioned a moment ago, the man who knows what all future events will be, namely the seer. Are you referring to this man or some other? Both to this one, he said, and another. Which one, I said, isn't the sort of man who, in addition to the future, knows everything that has been and is now and is ignorant of nothing? Let us postulate the existence of such a man. Of this man, I think you would say that there was no one living who was more scientific. Certainly not. There is one additional thing I want to know. Which one of the sciences makes him happy? Do all of them do this equally? No, very unequally, he said. Well, which one in particular makes him happy? The one by which he knows which one of the things are and have been and are to come? Will it be the one by which he knows checker playing? Oh, for heaven's sake, he said. Well, the one by which he knows calculation? Of course not. Well, will it be that by which he knows health? That's better, he said. But the most likely case, I said, is that by which he knows what? By which he knows good, he said, and evil. You wretch, said I, all this time you've been leading me right round in a circle and concealing from me that it was not living scientifically that was making us fare well and be happy, even if we possessed all the sciences put together, but that we have to have this one science of good and evil. Because, Critias, if you consent to take away this science from the other sciences, will medicine any the less produce health, or cobbling produce shoes, or the art of weaving produce clothes, or will the pilot's art any less prevent us from dying at sea, or the general's art in war? They will do it just the same, he said. But, my dear Critias, our chance of getting any of these things well and beneficially done will have vanished if this is lacking. You are right. Then this science, at any rate, is not temperance, as it seems, but that one of which the function is to benefit us. For it is not a science of science, an absence of science, but of good and evil. So that, if this latter one is beneficial, temperance would be something else for us. But why should not temperance be beneficial, he said? Because if temperance really is a science of sciences, and rules over the other sciences, then I suppose it would rule over this science of the good, and would benefit us. And would this science make us healthy, I said, and not the art of medicine? And would it perform the tasks of the other arts rather than each of them performing its own task? Didn't we protest solemnly just a moment ago that it is a science of science, an absence of science only, and of nothing else? We did, didn't we? It seems so, at any rate. Then it will not be the craftsman of health? Certainly not, because health belonged to some other art, didn't it? Yes, to another. Then it will be of no benefit, my friend, because we have just awarded this work to another art. Isn't that so? Yes, indeed. Then how will temperance be beneficial when it is the craftsman of no beneficial thing? Apparently it won't be any benefit at all, Socrates. You see then, Critias, that my earlier fears were reasonable, and that I was right to blame myself for discerning nothing useful in temperance, because I don't suppose that the thing we have agreed to be the finest of all would have turned out to be of no benefit if I had been of any use in making a good search. But now we have got the worst of it in every way, and are unable to discover to which one of existing things the lawgiver gives this name, temperance. Furthermore, we gave our joint assent to many things which did not follow from our argument. For instance, we conceded that there was a science of science when the argument did not allow us to make this statement. Again, we conceded that this science knew the tasks of the other sciences, when the argument did not allow us to say this either, so that our temperate man should turn out to be knowing both that he knows things he knows and does not know things he does not know. And we made this concession in the most prodigal manner, quite overlooking the impossibility that a person should in some fashion know what he does not know at all, because our agreement amounts to saying he knows things he does not know. And yet, I think, there could be nothing more irrational than this. But in spite of the fact that the inquiry has shown us to be both complacent and easy, it is not a whit more capable of discovering the truth. It has, in fact, made fun of the truth to this extent, that it has very insolently exposed as useless the definition of temperance which we agreed on and invented earlier. I am not so much vexed on my own account, but on yours, Charmides, I said. I am very vexed indeed if, with such a body and, in addition, a most temperate soul, you should derive no benefit from this temperance, nor should it be of any use to you in this present life. And I am still more vexed on behalf of the charm I took so much trouble to learn from the Thracian, if it should turn out to be worthless. I really do not believe this to be the case. Rather, I think that I am a worthless inquirer, because I think that temperance is a great good, and if you truly have it, that you are blessed. So see whether you do have it, and are in no need of the charm, because if you do have it, my advice to you would rather be to regard me as a babbler, incapable of finding out anything whatsoever by means of argument, and yourself as being exactly as happy as you are temperate. And Charmides said, But good heavens, Socrates, I don't know whether I have it or whether I don't, because how would I know the nature of a thing when neither you nor Critias is able to discover it, as you say? However, I don't really believe you, Socrates, but I think I am very much in need of the charm, and as far as I am concerned, I am willing to be charmed by you every day until you say I have had enough. Very well, Charmides, said Critias, if you do this, it will convince me of your temperance. If you submit yourself to be charmed by Socrates, and let nothing great or small dissuade you from it. This is the course I shall follow, he said, and I shall not give it up. I would be acting badly if I failed to obey my guardian and did not carry out your commands. Well then, said Critias, these are my instructions, and I shall execute them, he said, from this day forward. Look here, I said, what are you two plotting? Nothing, said Charmides, our plotting is all done. Are you going to use force, I asked, and don't I get a preliminary hearing? We shall have to use force, said Charmides, seeing that this fellow here has given me my orders, so you had better take counsel as to your own procedure. What use is counsel, said I, because when you undertake to do anything by force, no man living can oppose you. Well then, he said, don't oppose me. Very well, I shan't, said I.